International Wildlife Film Festival showcases the best in wildlife films. Every year, filmmakers from around the world send their latest works to Missoula, Montana to be judged for scientific accuracy, artistic values, and production excellence.
The International Wildlife Film Festival is a unique international event created and based entirely in Missoula. The festival is the longest running of its kind in the world and attracts nearly 10,000 visitors to downtown Missoula every spring.
These challenges of matching the environmental concerns with the media challenges and the wildlife concerns will continue into the next 25 years of my life, I'm sure. But it's wonderful to come to an event like this and see such gorgeous films, fantastic films, beautiful films. It's hard sometimes to find the appropriate adjectives for the works that I've been watching at the screenings. They've been so moving, and I just wish I could be out there enjoying that wildlife myself. And so I have to take it vicariously, but it's well worth doing so. It's hardly necessary for me to detail the plight of animals and plants that share this earth with us. All of you are well aware and could easily be up here as I am to discuss the biodiversity needs, the habitat preservation, the elimination of species extinction. I mean, these are all concerns that you're knowledgeable about. So I'm not going to try and bore you with talking about the thousands of species on the planet. I would like to remind you of something that Gro Harlem Brundtland said when she was Prime Minister of Norway, and she also headed up a United Nations Commission about the environment named after her, the Brundtland Commission, and put out an excellent report. And she said, "We are living in an historic transitional period in which awareness of the conflict between human activities and environmental constraints is literally exploding. Never before in our history have we had so much knowledge, technology, and resources. Never before have we had such great capacities. The time and the opportunity has come to break out of the negative trends of the past." And that's what I think we've heard some of this dialogue at the workshops, where we're trying to break out of those trends and move into a new trend. It's due to people like you who make or watch, I'm sure I have both here in the audience, and we do both regardless, who make and watch wildlife films, that we can develop these positive trends for both the present and the future. You know, environmental activism is something that can be motivated by the films, by the images, by the audio. And audio in films and TV is equally important to the images, what is said about what we're seeing. And we're moved by that. And I think most of us as children are moved. If you look at the volumes of books and publications for children, it's nature, it's animals, it's plants, but the animals attract. And I think they give us that initial tie to the earth. I mean, whether or not it was, if you had the experiences I did when I was camping as a child and the bear came to the tent, or as I'm later in my life running down the trail and the bears and I encounter each other, you realize that there's a connection here. I mean, I'm still waiting to run into the mountain lion. I'd love to see a mountain lion in the wild. There's so many other animals that I would love to see. I've been fortunate enough to have traveled to over 50 countries, and the thing that I try to do in every single country is go out and get out of the city and see the wildlife, because that is what connects me to this planet Earth. So the trends that we have can be positive. We need to make those stories. But is the information being given accurate? Is it reliable? This is a controversial debate. I wasn't here last year or the year before, but I've heard that there's been some debate over that. My answer to my own question is yes and no. You know, I've often wondered, for example, how lions or chimpanzees, birds, or any other species for that matter, at least the bigger ones, can, you know, be born, grow up, find a mate, have sex, get pregnant, give birth, raise young, and die all in 1 hour. I marvel at it. I just quite frankly wish that maybe we had some of those miracles of the screen in real life. You know, if we could have everything happen that fast, maybe we could save some of these animals from extinction. But before I go into a little bit more detail, I want to be sure that you don't misunderstand some of my comments, and misunderstanding communication is so important in this medium. You know, because I'm reminded of that medical doctor. He was in the medical service, an OB/GYN practice. You know, he had a Korean woman come in who was in very active labor and very active pain. And the doctor said, well, would you like some pain medicine? And the woman said, no, I'm in enough pain already. Well, a little communication is important, and we have to be sure that we express ourselves correctly to get our message across correctly. And I'm pained, quite frankly, by the continued expansion of an overpopulated society. People have been asking me the last few days, well, what's the theme of my talk? And of course, it's wildlife, it's film, but I kept thinking about it as I reread my presentation, as I thought about what was being said at the workshops. And I keep coming back to the one critical concern that made me an environmentalist in the first place. In 1968, I sat in a biology class. I was trying to learn the parts of the body and how they function. But the instructor was had a lot of foresight, and she said, you need to read this book called The Population Bomb. It had just come out. It was written by Dr. Paul Ehrlich, a very well-known biologist. He was the co-creator of the coevolution theory, along with Dr. Peter Raven, who is with Missouri Botanical Garden. Dr. Ehrlich is there at Stanford, and he's done the longest study of the butterflies and population explosion and so forth. And he's written numerous books, extensive number of books since then. But I read this short little book, and I said, you know, we are overpopulated. We are extremely overpopulated. And if we don't get a handle on human overpopulation, we're not going to get a handle on any of the other problems facing us, environmentally speaking. And I commend people who are working just on trying to save one habitat. One of my very first concerns, because I happened to get a little newsletter, it was only $1 membership, and as a student that seemed pretty good. I'll pay my $1 for the Committee for the Preservation of the Tule Elk. This was the smallest elk species in the world. It had gotten down to about 22 animals in the 1922s. There was a woman who turned out later to, she happened to become my mother-in-law, and now my ex-mother-in-law, and she worked for about 20 years to try and save that Tule elk and create a national wildlife refuge in the Owens Valley, and she was successful at it. And it proved to me what people can do. Just an elementary school teacher can, you know, fight and lead a battle like that. And it's efforts like that when we get together as people and we work together, we can accomplish a lot. And then I prided her for working on just the Tule elk. I mean, she was dedicated to it, because if we didn't have that one woman working on that one species, I don't think those animals would be saved. But yet, at the same time, we have to look at the bigger picture. We have to look at the small picture, we have to look at the bigger picture. Our very survival and that of our descendants will depend upon maintaining the basic ecosystem services performed by the countless living things, from those large vertebrates, including us, I guess, and the invertebrates down to the microbes. Even the air, the water, and the earth itself. I mean, some people may even say that, you know, the rocks have life, and in a way they do. It's much easier for us as filmmakers and people telling the environmental story to talk about the relationship between the large plants and animals and their importance to the bigger scheme of things than it is to document the battle over a canyon, a river, or a forest that has some, well, those battles are actually easier to document too if they have some rare and endangered species that draws a lot of attention. But the really hard story to tell is the one that's going to be the challenge for future filmmakers. And I see that as the one that shows how overconsumption, aside from overpopulation of the billions of people on this planet, is causing wildlife extinction. It's going to be the task of the filmmaker to show that the greed for more profits at the expense of environmental cleanliness is causing ecological disaster. It's going to be the role of filmmakers to show that environmental destruction, which seems so innocuous, I'm talking about that next housing tract, that just little suburban development, the next mini mall, the next shopping mall, the next freeway, is truly the real threat to species, endangered and otherwise. One of my last award-winning films was called Population Crisis USA. It's the first major documentary, and I just finished it in 1993, to talk about overpopulation in the United States. And I tried to look and see what was already available. And I discovered there were plenty of shows, films about overpopulation in the rest of the world, because it's much easier to go to India or Ethiopia and show people dying in the streets. But how in this country do I show that our wonderful lifestyle, which is really plotted in the regular movies. You look at any of the movies and you see people with cars and houses and conveniences, refrigerators and running water, and all these things that we take for granted. Just our ordinary everyday lifestyle of the middle class and even the poor in this country is 1,000 times better than the majority of the people in the world. And how do you show these things that you and I enjoy? And I admit, I enjoy having my running water. I enjoy flicking on the switch and having my lights and electricity. And I enjoy turning on my TV when I want to see what's going on in the news. I enjoy all these. How do I show that this is awful? And this is causing wildlife extinction. And this is what's the problem with overpopulation in the United States. I'll tell you, it was not an easy story to tell. It was much easier for my first Emmy Award-winning piece called Gem in the Heart of the City about the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area and Rim of the Valley Corridor, an area that most people ignore because they think that Los Angeles is just a bunch of freeways and development, but it happens to be in Los Angeles. And it was a lot easier to go up there and show the wonderful recreational, cultural opportunities. I was the first to go and document on film the winter solstice site of the Chumash Indian, which was on Rockadine's property. Nobody had been allowed ever to go in and film this site. There was a mock-up in the Southwest Museum showing how the light came down. You know, we used the mock-up, but we went out to the real site. It was a lot easier to go out there and show the animals, show people hiking on the trails, show people bicycling, show the wheelchair trails, all these kinds of things. But to try and show these interrelationships, it's a problem. It's a real problem, and I challenge all of us to do it. And it reminds me of a story that of the man who had a very large dog, and his neighbor had a pet rabbit that was kept in a cage next door. And one day the dog came home with a rabbit in its mouth. And naturally, the people were very upset. They didn't really want to have their neighbor know that their dog came home with the rabbit in the mouth. So what did? They washed the rabbit, and they took the blow dryer, and they blow dried the rabbit and made it all clean and nice again, and they went and snuck it back in the night to the cage. So the next day, the neighbor comes back and says, you know, the oddest thing happened. Yesterday, our rabbit died, and we buried it, and today it was in the cage. Well, I think that we have to be daring enough to tell the truth. I mean, the neighbor obviously wasn't. We have the problem, though, of making it educational and entertaining while we're telling this horrible story, all at the same time. Our job isn't easy. Communication is truly difficult. When I started doing radio, I discovered that I'd been supposedly taught to read, write, you know, the R's, arithmetic, and so forth. But there was one skill that, at least in my educational system in Southern California, we hadn't been taught, and that was the art of listening. And I found that when I was doing my interviews, that it was really better, rather than try and be ready to ask my next question that I'd all prepared, would be to listen to what my guests had to say, what the person was saying, and then respond to it. And it was a much better interview. We have to be willing to listen to what's going on out there and use all of our senses. As an environmental broadcaster, I'm pained by the minimal coverage on the airways, as I'm sure you all are. We would all like our works to be shown so many more times. Now, outside of my shows, of course, and the films that we see here, these wonderful films at the festival, we have very little coverage on the airwaves of nature, of wildlife, of environmental issues. Over the years of doing my programs, I've done a significant number on wildlife and habitat, although I don't attempt to do the nature ones that I've seen so beautifully presented here, because other people are doing it. What I'm trying to do is bridge that gap. And but I find that few shows other than mine tackle these controversial debates over saving a unique ecosystem versus allowing it to be turned into dumps, to freeways, to other developments. You know, quite frankly, it's difficult because these battles go on for many phases. You know, it's like my ex-mother-in-law. I knew her before I met my ex, and then I worked with them as a family team, and then I continue to work with her after the divorce, and it continues to this day that we have to keep up on what we think are successes. Even though those refuges were established, there's still threats to them. The outside pressures, almost every single national park in this country has serious threats, be it air pollution or dams or too many tourists doing the wrong thing. I mean, I've gone to parks and seen people take their saw out and cut down live trees, and nowadays we're really afraid to even confront people and say, no, this isn't the proper behavior. I mean, I come from central Los Angeles, and you know, I've had the problems of burglaries and riots, and I was in the heart of it all. And I'm afraid to confront people when they pass by and they paint on my walls and they do other kinds of things. I've had the guns pulled out in front of me at my home, and it's a scary kind of endeavor. But yet, I think that's just part of living in the city. I'm not going to run away because I want that wilderness to be wilderness. I want a home for the wildlife, and if I go moving out of the city, there isn't going to be any home for the wildlife or wilderness if we all move out of the city. So I'm willing to sacrifice my life myself. I'm just fortunate that in a way, at least it's only these criminals that are threatening me like that. We don't have the threats that some environmentalists have. As I'm sure you're well aware, the Nigerian environmentalist who was a recipient of numerous international honors, who was hanged by his government for his environmental work. I have a friend talking about poetry earlier, a lawyer, environmental poet from Malaysia who has been under house arrest, and when I went to Malaysia I couldn't even look him up. I mean, people are doing struggling a lot more. You read the stories of the scientists and biologists out there in the field and what they have to go through with the local people, and I commend them. And we definitely need to give the support, both to us documenting those stories, which is a challenge in and of itself, and to the people who are doing those researches. But the problem is these battles go on over an extended period of time. Public hearings, lawsuits, protests, they go on for years, they go on for decades. Most media only want to cover it once or twice. And it's too late then for public action by the time the media comes and says a decision was made today. I mean, these decisions, participating in that horrible environmental impact statement, environmental impact report, environmental impact assessment review process, is a boring process, and it takes a long time, and it's certainly not an exciting one to present in a film. But somehow we need to draw attention to these issues on a constant, regular basis. The trick is to give an area or a species the needed attention over and over again so that the public can respond. You know, the public has gotten the feel and the belief that rainforests must be saved, particularly in the United States. It's very easy for people to go, save the rainforest. But yet in Southern California, just in the city of Los Angeles, we have the largest oak forest in Sunshine Canyon left, and that shows the whole grassland oak ecosystem. And they want to put a dump. And Ellesmere Canyon, one of the few remaining in Angeles National Forest, right in the northwest of Los Angeles, is proposed for the largest solid waste landfill in the country. And these are areas that people don't know about, because for me to get in and look at it, I'm being taped, I'll say it, I'll go on public record. I trespassed. I had to be able to see this area and to be able to know what the problem was. I had to go out for my early morning run and hike, and I just got lost, actually, right? I mean, somebody directed me, said, go that direction, you'll see some interesting oak trees. I really didn't know where I was, but I discovered the most beautiful habitat, the most beautiful ecosystems. If the public doesn't see those ecosystems, why are they going to save it? I commend somebody like David Brower, who, with his picture format books, he was the first to create those, who documented on film places like Grand Canyon and Glen Canyon that were threatened with dams, and many other places. If he didn't bring some of those sites to the public's attention by pictures, we wouldn't have them. Ansel Adams, and go back further. I mean, look at the writings of our nature writers. Look at John Muir, one of our founding fathers of the environmental movement. They wrote about the places, Yosemite, that needed to be saved. Of course, John Muir lost also. I mean, we think died over losing Hetch Hetchy, which was an equivalent Yosemite. People couldn't get there, enough people to see it. And we know that when people see the wildlife, when they see the areas, they're going to do something about it. So we have an important role in this kind of work. Clayoquot Sound in British Columbia, Ward Valley in California, where they're proposing a large low-level radioactive waste dump. Headwaters Forest in Northern California, an ancient redwood forest, the largest tract left of such a rainwood forest. These, unfortunately, are not household words like tropical rainforest. And what's amazing to me is I went up last summer to the Clayoquot Forest to do that story, to the Sound, and hundreds of people were getting arrested in British Columbia. Out of Ward Valley, people were getting arrested. Headwaters Forest, they're getting arrested. But the media considers this a local story. It's covered on the front page of the local newspaper, but did the LA Times, the New York Times, did the Missoula, Montana papers cover these arrests? I mean, we have environmentalists willing to get arrested, and yet you don't hear about it on the news, and yet coming to this event, you know, my plane was packed full of people ready to go and cover, you know, an arrest of the Unabomber. Well, of course, that person's done some awful things, and it deserves media coverage. But why didn't we have these carloads of media going where people are putting down their lives, they're literally putting their bodies on the line for the wildlife? And we have to change the attitude somehow. You know, to tell these kinds of stories, the problem, as we were discussing in some workshops earlier, is that of funding. And to get the funding, we have to challenge our principles. If you tell the story of a large corporation that will destroy an area by mining or oil drilling or other exploitative development, will you get those needed dollars? I just interviewed someone yesterday, a professor, who indicated he didn't get some of those research grant dollars when he came out and talked about the damage of nuclear testing on the people, the downwinders in Utah in the 50s. As well as the wildlife that had to be affected, that nobody's really ever still documented to this day. I mean, somebody has to be willing to stand up and not necessarily get those dollars. I encourage you, I give you my support, as I have, to keep on fighting to preserve your integrity. And hopefully, as they say, you and I will at least sleep better. Hopefully we'll sleep better, albeit a little poorer and a little hungrier. You know, I'm reminded of another story of a man who was going through the booming oil fields of southern Oklahoma, and he saw somebody gave a man a lift on his way to the county seat, and the two were driving along some of these this beautiful farmland that's now scarred by bulldozers and drilling rigs and cluttered with all sorts of pumps and storage tanks. And he would guess that his passenger was a farmer living in the area, and so the driver, you know, started moving the conversation in the direction of these these tall tales of quick, rich schemes that the speculators and the farmers were getting rich very fast from this. So the local man acknowledged that these stories were actually founded on fact. The guy asked, "Well, you own a farm here?" "Yeah, I own one." "Any oil wells on it?" "Oh, yeah, I've got 3 good ones, and they say there's 300 barrels a day. And what in the world are you going to do with all that money you're getting?" And the farmer, he looked around for a moment, and he gazed, and he looked across this machine-scarred field, and he answered, "Why, I'm going to buy me a farm that ain't got any oil wells on it." He knew what he had lost. Is it really the money that's at stake? If we lose our wildlife, we're losing a lot more. Let's help create a new morality, an enlightened and noble view of humanity's role in nature, one not of always conquering nature. The framers of our Constitution did not delineate what I consider 2 important rights. And I can speak as a framer. I'm a descendant of some of the signers of the Constitution and people like Thomas Jefferson, who actually wrote the Constitution. And I wish I'd been around to talk with him at the time, because I would have told him that he needed to indicate the right to a quality environment and the right for all species to survive. Now, they probably simply didn't deem it necessary at the time to delineate those rights. It was just understood that those rights existed. Today, the quest for a quality environment with all species evolving at a natural rate without human interruption is more than a right. It is a crucial obligation. As anthropologist Margaret Mead commented, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I certainly believe that the 19th International Wildlife Film Festival will have the impact to spread around the world, and the group here can make that change. Regardless of one's religious, cultural, or other differences, we must rethink our political, economic, and sociological structures so as to develop a united Earth based on bioregionalism. Totally different concept. I wish Thomas Jefferson and all his gang were here today to do a little rewriting that we so desperately need. We have to consider ecological principles. We have to consider all of life on this Mother Earth. We have to stop the population explosion that is putting the demands on wildlife and their habitat. Do you realize that over 83 million people are being added to the planet every single year? That figure equals to 7,225,000 births every month, 1,667,000 every week, 238,000 every day, 9,900 every hour, 164 every minute, and 2.7 every second. I've yet to see a 0.7 child, but you know, that's the way statistics are. You have to take them or leave them, but someplace around there. I did some math last night on that, and I thought about it. I said, the problem is, again, how do we get these figures so we can visualize it? Well, my math's not as perfect as the scientists who come up with 2.7 children, but I did figure it out that in 3 years, the number of people that we have adding to the population on this planet every year would mean that in 3 years, we would have to take care of the same number of people that are in the United States today. Now, we all know that we are providing the social services, schools, education, police, fire, sewage systems, you name it, to make a quality environment that we have now. We don't have everything that we would like now. We are not taking care of the over 260 million people in the United States today, and yet we're adding that equivalent number of people on this planet every 3 years. Where and how are we going to take care of them? We're the wealthiest country in the world, and we're not doing it. Those human numbers put pressures, as you well know, on wildlife, which means that within 10 years, we may not be losing just 5 species per day, as we are now, but 5 species per hour. By the year 2000, at the current rate, 20% of all Earth species will be lost forever. You know how important these species are to the rich cornucopia of medicines, industrial uses, agricultural benefits. The solutions do exist. This is what's amazing. We simply are not far-sighted enough to start implementing them now. As I tell the oil companies, why not invest in alternative technologies now while we still need oil and we have some oil left? Why wait until it's all gone? Same thing I tell to the logging companies. Why not invest in other ways? In other words, our ancient forests don't have to be cut. The handful that are left, they could be preserved if we switch not just to recycled paper, which has become real popular, but remember, recycled paper still originally had a virgin tree cut down, and it still had trees being recycled. What we need is tree-free paper, and we have it, canaf. And going back to that wonderful mainstay, hemp. You know what our Constitution was written on? Hemp. Yes, that wonderful plant where there are over 2,000 products that can be made from it, aside from the joints for smoking it. Oh, which has some uses too. Now, solar technology is viable today. We don't have to wait for the future. Integrated pest management allows for farming without hazardous insecticides and pesticides. Ecotourism is becoming a popular way to help conserve wildlife. If it's true ecotourism, if it's just the same old package tour and they say it's ecotourism because they're looking at wildlife, don't buy into it. You know, ecotourism truly means putting money back into the local economy, the local people, putting money back into conservation, habitat programs, and helping the local people. When I travel as an ecotourist, and I do it often, I clear out and have my friends clear out their medicine cabinets. I mean, an aspirin to us is nothing. It costs, you know, $1, you know, for a handful of aspirin. And in some of these rural medical clinics, that is like giving them penicillin. I mean, it is so valuable. We clear out our medicines. I take it down. I clear out my bookshelf. I clear out my clothes. And I take as the limit I possibly can on the plane of weight, so that I can distribute these things, so that people know that I'm not coming down to take advantage of them, I'm coming down to give to them. And so stop traveling lightly, people. A real ecotourist has more suitcases than you know what to do with. And I'm sure, of course, I could go on and on, but I'm going to run out of time, and the tape's going to run out if I don't watch out here. Now, I think I still have a few minutes left. There are hundreds of books now on the market. When I started environmental activism in the 1970s, there were one bookshelf for the 70s of ecological books. And now I get a bookshelf a week of ecological books. So you can read about all the wonderful ways. You didn't come here to have me tell you how to live ecologically, but I know you know how, and I know that you're doing the best you can. You know, I'm reminded of a story of a backpacking friend who told me of a time not too long ago when two young men were hiking across an alpine meadow in the Alaskan tundra, and they spotted one of these big, I've got to be careful, I know there's some bear experts here. Apparently, up there in the Alaskan tundra, where I haven't backpacked, they're huge silverback grizzly bears. And they came across one about 200 yards away, and one hiker was puzzled when the other bent down and started changing his shoes. And he said, you know, well, what are you doing? You can't outrun that grizzly. And the hiker replied, no, but I can outrun you. So, too many people, unfortunately, are thinking only of their survival. The short-sightedness of such an attitude paves the way for the destruction of all who follow. As Eleanor Roosevelt observed, perhaps nature is our best assurance of immortality. Let's keep with what we have left and be proper stewards of all of the Earth's resources. When I was a college student, I was concerned about wildlife and wilderness. I hadn't really gotten into running and backpacking, but I just knew that it had to be there. And even if I hadn't seen it, I wanted to do something. And so I thought, well, there are thousands of species out there, and they're the groups to protect the big ones. So I went down the list of Southern California species, and I said, well, who's protecting? I had to learn Latin, Cyprinodon diabolus. Anybody know what I'm talking about? It's the little devil's hole pupfish. There are only about 300 individuals left. They were only found in one water spring called Devil's Hole. And it's now part of the Death Valley National Park, which used to be a monument, but even then it wasn't even part of too much protected. And some cattle rancher wanted to pump some water, which was pulling the water level out of the hole, and there goes the last. The pupfish were really interesting species. I'm not a fisherman. I don't understand fish. But somehow I just said, this species needs somebody to draw attention to it, so I became president of Save Our Pupfish. And I'd never seen the pupfish, even when I became president of it. Eventually I went out and saw them. But it shows that you can do that. You don't have to be an expert. And I always maintained that even though I wasn't a biologist, I could still care about a species and do it. I started another petition then, too, because I realized with the habitat destruction in California, we have over 95% of all of our estuaries and wetlands along the coast gone, destroyed totally. So I started a petition to help have research for the government to develop the non-stop goose, the one who could fly, you know, from Canada to Mexico and bypass the western coast where there are no wetlands for them to stop off at. I mean, people took me seriously. I mean, that's how much they believed in technology. I mean, I was trying to make a point that, you know, maybe this non-stop goose can't really be developed, and we better preserve their habitat. I'm reminded of another incident of Dr. Noel Brown. He just retired as the executive director of the North American program for the United Nations Environment Program. And he recounted a story of one of the first situations where the United Nations was asked to provide safe conduct over a war zone. For what? What do you think they provided safe conduct for? Whooping cranes. Now, these endangered birds spend winter and summer, as many migrating birds of that nature do, on in different places, in this case different continents, and they had to fly over warring nations like Iran and Iraq and some of those. And I think it was a great act of mankind that we had someone concerned enough to ask for the United Nations help in protecting them on that flight. And we really need to ask for help from everyone for all our wildlife. To some people, the Earth is being called Gaia. It's a living organism. To others, it's a living spaceship. But regardless of how you want to view it, if you just want to view it as your home and place where you're growing up and eating and sleeping and having your fun, it's a place that must be self-sustaining. It's a place that creatures...
The International Wildlife Film Festival operates year-round as a nonprofit organization dedicated to the enhancement of our natural world through understanding and education. We rely primarily on volunteer staff and community involvement. The festival has grown beyond all expectations. Our film, video, and written archives are a major education and teaching resource. Your support is crucial to our continued success in meeting our mission.